So game 4 here of the match, ElZorro versus TasteHumanity. ElZorro's up 2-1. I'm here with J-Nails commentating with me. Thank you, J-Nails, for being here.
So we're one play into this, and I already dislike it. There are some occasions where it can make sense to buy Humble Castle and Crumbling Castle as your first two buys. Those occasions are much more rare than the rate at which they're bought, and like low-level league matches would make you believe. Players seem to love those two things. They're like, oh, look at these cool castles. I got to get them before my opponent does. I think there's this sort of like psychological sense of like there's one of these, so if I don't snatch it, my opponent will. But like you basically bought a copper, a silver, and an estate. I would not want to put a copper, silver, and an estate in my deck. And the points are not going to matter when you're one turn into the game. Even a marginal increase in deck quality is going to have a snowball effect over the long term for the rest of the game, and your opponent's deck's going to be a lot better.
There are, like, crop rotation somewhat enables the castle's strategy, but not to the extent that you would open with it, I think. Yeah. Certainly I want to be opening Lookout here, and I'm not sure if you'd pair that with Bard or Taxman, or even...
I would think Bard. I don't want Taxman at all here.
We'll see if ElZorro trashes the Crumbling Castle, which might actually be the best thing for their deck right now.
Yeah. Taxman is in general a very weak card. I think it gets strong in some contexts. So, for example, Supplies, which we saw in the previous Kingdom, makes Taxman a lot more... oh my god, I've had like a mind fart. What's the word? A card you want a lot more. This word I'm just blanking on. Because Taxman isn't even a true thinner as it is, right? Like, if you take a copper and turn it into a silver, you haven't actually made your deck any thinner. You turn one stop card into like a slightly less bad stop card. Whereas if you turn copper into a supply, as what you said, it's sort of functionally like a cantrip because it gives you a horse which helps you draw again. You have functionally speaking thinned your deck because you replace a card that gets in your way with a card that doesn't.
Right.
So something like either Stockpile or Coin of the Realm makes Taxman considerable, but absent that, usually I think it's pretty weak.
I find the attack part of Taxman to be a little bit underrated. I've played just enough games where the Taxman is just always causing me to miss my price points over and over again. And maybe that's just a function of a small sample size, but I think there's circumstances where it can be nice.
To its credit, I did just buy Taxman, like 3 Taxmen, the last time I played with it, because there was IGG around, and so the payload of the engine was just buying one IGG and then Taxmanning it over and over to give your opponent all the curses.
I had a very fun combo, which was Taxman stockpiles on a donate board. So I was able to open Taxman donate and then trash everything but 4 coppers and turn those into stockpiles.
Yeah, that's nice.
So going back to what they both opened with, well, they got the castles, silvers, and lookouts, and ElZorro got a turn 3 tactician.
I'm not a big fan of the tactician here. Actually, let me rethink that. I think a tactician deck could be pretty fun. I could see it. I was overlooking Sacred Grove when I said that.
So basically, that would be you trash all of your treasures, and then you basically play with Sacred Groves to give you all your money, and then end every turn by playing a tactician. So you just draw 10 cards, have an action, and can play a bunch more Sacred Groves the next turn.
The main card I'd be looking to trash here is my estates. The coppers don't even so much get in the way. Like, I wouldn't be adding treasures, really. But, like, Storyteller just turns those coppers into little cantrips. And so, like, you could live with a tactician deck that still had some coppers floating around in it. But you wouldn't be putting treasures in your deck for payload purposes, that's for sure.
And that would be a double tactician deck. So there would be 2 tacticians, you'd be playing one every turn.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you just look at tactician at face value, it looks like, I forfeit 1 turn, and then I get, like, a really good turn the following turn. And there are contexts where that's good. Like, especially contexts where you want to spike one big number. Like, it can work well with Dominate here, even if you weren't building a double tactician deck or whatever, or Inheritance. But that has more limited value. You often don't want to pass on half your turns by tacticianing them away. The double tactician deck is very tricky to play, and I think is hard to pull off if you're newer to the game, but is often very strong. Because the benefit of having like 5 extra cards and an extra action at the start of every turn is huge in terms of reliability. The tricky part is building a deck that runs without treasures, which at this level, as we saw last game, they love buying silver and gold more than they should. And the Tactician deck discards all your silvers and golds before you can play them.
Yeah,
so it's hard. Like, you don't naturally think, oh, I should just build a deck that doesn't have treasures in it, just as actions. But like, that would be pretty strong here.
and I think, I wouldn't fault either of these players for not knowing how or having ever played a double Tactician deck. Those are tough decks to play well. But absent that, the one Tactician deck seems like a weird hybrid where you are really giving up a full turn now to have sort of a turn and a half next turn. And it doesn't seem like the math works out super well in that case.
Yeah. Now, supposing you didn't see the double Tactician deck, you could still build a big engine here. And you absolutely should. Two things that make building the engine necessary are A, dominate, and B, castles. Either of those independently makes big money utterly losing, for the same reason we were saying Groundskeeper a second ago does, which is if there's more points to go around, then there's more points you have to score before you win, because you don't reach like half points just by getting 5 provinces or so. You reach half points by getting 8 provinces. And so it gives the engine more time to build, which the engine just always wins in the long run. And so I would not be playing big money here. And even if you ignore Tactician, you've got draw with nobles, you got draw with storyteller, I think is even better. You have actions with border village plus buyers like a grove. It's all kind of expensive, but it's there. And it's worth building too.
Yeah, what Feliver is asking or suggesting is that if you have a deck that can hit 8 reliably, but it's never going to hit 14, then single Tactician could potentially let you, if you every other turn buy a dominate, that's better than every turn buying a province.
Hey, I'm back.
Hello, and joining us again is Minion Pawn. Welcome back, Minion Pawn.
Thanks. I got kicked out. It was kind of complicated, but I'm back.
So we're looking at Castle's Kingdom. There's one Tactician floating around out there, and I'm surprised the border villages are so high, the sacred groves are so high, and one of the TasteHumanity didn't even end up buying a lookout. I just desperately want to get rid of all my estates and coppers.
Yeah,
if you're not playing with the Tactician deck, I think I'm more concerned with trashing my estates and coppers, like a lot of them, preferably all of them, because you're not going to have a 10 card hand to start out with. And so there's a risk, like even if you have storytellers in your deck, that you don't find the storytellers early and the coppers just start you dudding before you ever get off the ground. And Lookout is a difficult card to trash with at any point in the game except for the beginning of the game, because you're trashing something randomly off the top of your deck and you have to trash. So that becomes a risky gamble later. And so if I weren't, I think you get by with one Lookout here because of the Tactician thing. But like if I didn't see that and I was building a standard engine, I'd probably have double Lookout. Maybe like even as early as turn 1, turn 2, or maybe like Bard Lookout followed by a second Lookout soon, because I really want to get thin. And with Lookout, you have to do that early.
Yeah.
So what I think here is that you can go Lookout early for trashing, Lookout silver, get up to Border Village, Storytellers and Groves, maybe Nobles, just draw up to dominate, I think. I mean, Castles, crop rotation seems pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of 6 options.
I think I would be fine
phenomenal.
letting my opponent... I think I would be fine letting my opponent build up to just get all of the castles and then build a deck that can dominate every turn. Because that deck that has all the castles is going to struggle to maybe buy a province every other turn with all those castles, and I'm going to be able to dominate, 4 turns in a row and outscore that. Especially because you're wasting time getting the $6 and $7 castles instead of adding engine pieces. It makes it harder to get up to that $10 castle.
Yeah. Now, it becomes absolutely true with Dominate around. But even setting aside Dominate, I would say the same thing that I said earlier would still work in the reverse direction, which is if you have extra stacks of green cards, then you should just build longer. It's not that like castles are better than provinces for scoring. Often I think they're pretty similar in terms of overall value. It's just there's now more points in the kingdom, which favors the deck that builds longer before cashing in. And so like just as if they went for provinces, I would go for castles and build longer to do so. If they're going for early castles, I'll just sit back and build a big deck and then go for provinces. And then if I have a deck that's doing 2 or 3 provinces per turn, it's eventually going to beat out the deck that's doing like maybe 1 castle per turn.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know what the percentage is, if it's 80% of games with Dominate, but most of the time I play Dominate, I'm not thinking about buying a province until their province pile is down to 3 or two to potentially end the game. I'm thinking about building to dominate, and often you and your opponent both hit dominate around the same time, so you just alternate dominates back and forth, and then when the province piles down to 2, you have to worry a little bit, because a deck that can dominate can also fairly easily double province and win the game that way.
Yeah, I think both of them have very severely underbuilt their decks, and decks that are this underbuilt, that Tactician is actually going to kind of shine, because like these decks are going to struggle to hit big numbers, and your best shot might just be throwing away one turn to have a really big turn the following turn.
Yeah, it looks like ElZorro has the capacity to get dominate if they draw, now that they have enough money with tactician turns.
I like the TasteHumanity crop rotation. That does a whole lot in this deck.
It seems really good.
It's like, I mean, given that you're probably going to have a green card in every hand, it's like starting every turn with 2 labs on top of your deck.
Yeah, and as we see here, ElZorro is going to be able to draw deck. If they're deck tracking and they know how many coppers they have, they can play this lookout at some point. And they may have done that and realized, no, they did have a copper down there. So they could have played a lookout to trash 1 copper.
They still can. They still can. Discard a copper. Let's just make sure it's not exactly 14 first, because then maybe you do.
No, it's 15 right now.
It's 15. Yeah.
And 100%.
So discard copper Storyteller. Play the lookout to trash the copper and top deck the Storyteller.
You wouldn't top deck the Storyteller, right?
Oh, it discards. The punctuation always gets you.
Yeah.
I'm not playing lookout, though.
Discard 3 cards there. Then you'd want to discard copper, green card, Storyteller, and leave the Storyteller on top. But obviously there they were not able to.
Yeah, they did not play the lookout to treasure copper, which seems very strange.
They probably just didn't notice that that was a thing that they could do.
And that's, I mean, a somewhat, I'll say, advanced skill. You've got to be paying attention to a lot of things in Dominion and tracking, sort of every card, how many cards of each you have in your deck. And often I end up looking in the trash to see how many coppers are in the trash, but then you're actually, here that TasteHumanity hasn't trashed any coppers, so that's helpful. And you have 3 cards left in your shuffle, so you can play the lookout, trash the copper, and then you can do the thing where you top deck the Storyteller. Although the Wind's Curse would have ruined that turn.
Yeah. Now, something that they couldn't actually have done it there. We're just discussing about it. Another, I think, fairly advanced thing that newer players will often miss out on the opportunity to do is to seed your next turn. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say, for example, instead of the discard 2 from Bard, it was like discard 3 from Warehouse, and you have a lookout in hand. So you could intentionally discard the extra Storyteller with the idea of playing the lookout, triggering that shuffle, so that now you have a new fresh shuffle that has a Storyteller right on the top, your key draw card. The idea is you're like setting up your next turn to guaranteed have a good hand. And you can do this with cards, like Courtyard or Artisan, or cards that discard plus cards that trigger a shuffle. Like, let's say you had a Forum and a Pearl Diver, right? You could discard 2 draw cards with Forum, play the Pearl Diver, trigger a shuffle where you draw 1, and then leave 1 on top, that sort of thing. Probably the biggest context of this is with horses, like Paddock or Livery, where you'll naturally have a discard pile that's just like chock full of horses. It's often worth it. You don't have to like spin 1 horse to trigger that shuffle, just for the sake of having a deck that's now got 10 horses sitting on top, which is guaranteed to draw. And I think people often like play games against like higher rated players and they'll just be like, I'm getting unlucky. I'd beat these people if I were luckier. And sometimes you don't realize that like a lot of times you're making your own luck. Like if you play the game right, you can make your deck more or less likely to have a dud turn. And definitely playing around that strategically is often very good.
There's even an abbreviation for that exact phrase. You make your own shuffle luck. So it is also, I think, in some sense you have action density. So you say, they keep drawing all their good actions and I'm not drawing my good actions. Like, well, their deck is a lot thinner than yours sometimes. ElZorro has 6 cards of their starting cards they've trashed, and TasteHumanity has 0. So just on the aggregate, they're going to have a lot more turns where they're drawing coppers and estates that they can't do very much. And ElZorro is going to have turns where they're able to find all their good stuff and be able to buy Dominate.
Yeah,
Okay.
If ElZorro would have gotten to Opulent Castle, then on the Tactician turns, those would be just huge.
Yep. Something I was about to say with Storyteller. Storyteller is a card that really rewards carefully tracking your deck, because, and also just knowing like how draw works in general in Dominion. With Storyteller, more than almost any other card, it's important to know precisely how many cards your deck is capable of drawing, because that lets you know how many treasures to spend. So like there was a situation there where ElZorro had like a Storyteller, they were choosing how much treasure to play, and they also had a Nobles. And so if you know that you have Storyteller plus 3 more draw coming up, and you should look at your discard, or not your discard, your deck, and be like, huh, there's like 7 cards left in my deck. I have a Nobles that can draw 3 of those. I should spend exactly 4 money on a Storyteller, so that Storyteller plus Nobles draws exactly to my deck, to the end of my deck, and not any further. And if you're off in either direction, like you spend too little on Storyteller, you end up not drawing. And you can also err in the other direction, which is you spend too much on Storyteller, you draw to the end of your deck, but you've wasted a bunch of your money in the interim, and now you're buying less than you could. And so you want to know exactly how many draw cards you have in your deck, how many cantrips you have in your deck, and how many stop cards you have in your deck. Because that's very important, particularly in that last Storyteller play, to know how many treasures you should be spending to hit exactly the amount of draw that you need.
Yeah, and while you were describing that, TasteHumanity played a Sacred Grove. They got the Sun's Gift, so they got to look at the top 4 cards and discard them or reorder them. And they had 2 green cards and 2 coppers, and they chose to keep the 2 coppers on top of their deck because those are money, and the green cards are not. But I think you want to be at the point of this game on turn 20 where the average value of a card in your deck is much, much higher than copper. So you trivially throw those coppers away because you know you're going to be drawing much better actions or, heaven forbid, golds.
Now, there's a secondary mistake here, which is they have crop rotation. So you don't even want to pick those green cards.
You're right. Absolutely. I missed that. So, good spot. Yeah. You can maneuver your deck, and nobles are okay for that, although you generally don't want to be discarding nobles. But one of the things we said at the beginning was that the crop rotation does make the castles deck a little bit better. But at this point, TasteHumanity feels pretty far behind.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to overcome getting dominated.
The 5 and 6 cost section of this kingdom is really the key section. Storyteller, Tactician, Border Village, Noble, Sacred Grove are all cards that I want a lot of, and they both look seldom touched.
Yeah, I would expect Border Villages to just that pile to empty very, very quickly in this kingdom.
Yes. Yeah, Border Villages should be at 0.
I hardly ever see Border Village not at 0.
It's a little tougher here because I guess you can just add lots of Storytellers if you need to, but you kind of also want a bunch of Sacred Groves, and the Nobles are probably going to go once the Border Villages, but I'm probably not going to touch Nobles until the Border Villages are low.
Yeah. Well, importantly, I don't particularly want more Nobles than Border Villages, because if I'm having to use Nobles as the action for my other Nobles, that's really sad. That second Nobles is like an Acropolis, like a card that's so bad you normally trash it at the beginning of the game. Whereas if I bought like 1 Nobles and then bought a Border Village to support the village for that Nobles, I not only have a card that is a village instead of an Acropolis, it came with a 5-cost card. And so Nobles are good here if you've got Border Villages to support them, but I wouldn't want so many Nobles that I'm using Nobles for both actions and draw. Nobles is a lot better for draw than action, and so you want probably as many Border Villages roughly as you have Groves and Nobles combined. I would say is a good number to have.
And I probably want to be spending all of my extra actions on Sacred Groves. Yeah. So
yes.
And then using Storyteller for draw because it's not terminal.
Yeah.
Yeah, going Border Village and Storytellers and Sacred Grove seems really solid.
This, by the way, is an example of a kingdom where like having silvers and golds in your deck is really not nearly as bad as we were saying earlier, because the draw is a lot more abundant, Storyteller and Nobles, and Storyteller makes the treasures into draw.
Yeah. And yeah, ElZorro has 8 money in hand.
Oh, that's you who said that.
So I think that, ElZorro was able to make the Tactician work here to hit the dominate points, which is good. They were able to dominate 3 times. And, that 27 points is a substantial percentage of the difference in the score here. Although there were, if all those times they bought Dominate, they bought Province instead, I think they still win here, the way the map works out.
Dominate is exact number without the Dominate, so you'd be behind Y1, so Dominates were huge. The Tactician worked really well with what he did compared to TasteHumanity.
Yeah, and we think, you could have built that same deck with 2 Tacticians or with 0 Tacticians. And I think both J-Nails and I like the 0 Tactician version.
Yeah, I think that could definitely...
I would probably play the double Tactician, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, double Tactician is just great for reliability when you have it.
It seems tough to get to Dominate on the with no treasures played. But
that's what, 4 Groves and a Bard?
You just need a lot of village support for that.
Yep.
And if you're drawing with Storyteller, you have to play player stuff comes into play as well.
Sorry, say that last thing again?
Wait. No, so you in that deck, you just play all the Sacred Groves at the end of the turn, so you don't worry about the Storytellers.
Right, I'm not too worried about lining up my Storytellers if I've got Tactician and I see like 10 cards at the start of my turn.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll play that Kingdom out sometime and test out those 2 strategies. Okay.
Yeah, like I said, you don't need to have double Tacticians to build an engine there. You could build either way.
All right, so that was it for Game 4, 3-1 Zorro, and we'll go to Game 5.